Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and praise the good Lord. The banksters, the billionaires, the oligarchs, the tech millionaires and entrepreneurs, they're here to save the world. They've done it. 181 of them have now signed on to a plan where they are now going to be putting the planet and people over profit. And if you believe that, you're a fucking idiot. I mean, I can't even believe they put it to paper. Joining me to discuss all the propaganda behind that and much more is Robbie Martin, the man who is half of Media Roots with his sister Abby. You can check him out over at Twitter, always with a nice flavorful spin on things. And if you want to check out just one of his YouTube channels, A Very Heavy Agenda, go over and subscribe today. Robbie, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How's it going with you, Jason?
It is going well. And, you know, with everything Epstein, there are some stories that are kind of sliding by my radar, but this was not one of them. However, this is like 3, 4, 5 days ago, and I haven't gotten to cover it yet. And to me, it was very reminiscent of the little part I put in Invisible Empire where Ted Turner and Michael Bloomberg were coming together with Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey and who else was it? David Rockefeller was still alive at the time. And they're going to save the planet because they really care about all of us. Well, now I think that this is a bigger PR move. And let's just go to the articles quick right here. This is where they kind of say, well, it might be PR spin. You think when Jamie Dimon is at the head of this roundtable group, Mr. Demon Face himself? I'm sorry, if you trust the man in the thumbnail, I don't think you're going to get very far in life. But they're all coming together. Listen, all this profit margin stuff, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, every big name you could imagine, Robbie, and every small one that wants to glom onto this propaganda has now signed up to say, you know what, we're not concerned about shareholders and profits as much. Are you buying this?
Oh yeah, it's great. You're not buying it, Jason? I mean, isn't this is the super rich saving us? Finally, I mean, they have the money to, save the planet, so we should trust them. I mean, I basically this to me I'm actually surprised they didn't sign a pledge like this earlier, because what have we been seeing over maybe the last 2 decades is corporations essentially virtue signaling and creating this sort of facade that they're these liberal people who are now even being considered woke. So you now even have the corporation Disney, for example, being accused of being woke, too woke, in fact, that so many people are turned off from Star Wars now because they think Disney has some kind of feminist agenda. Well, I'll tell you right now that the only agenda a major corporation has is profits. And the next year, it's more profits than last year. In fact, it's actually quarterly. They're continuously trying to outdo their profits from every previous quarter. And I think in general, corporations seem to believe that liberalism, or just sort of virtue signaling a liberal ideology, somehow is profitable for them. And I kind of almost see this as an inevitable step in that direction. It's like, well, why not all get together and sign normally these kinds of letters are signed by politicians and stuff, like PNAC letters and things like that, but this is almost like the opposite of that. They're trying to make this pledge that they're actually going to start doing good for society. And it is really an inevitable step that they've taken, because what do oligarchs and billionaires and CEOs already do in society themselves? They try to ingratiate themselves with society by being into philanthropy. I mean, look at Epstein, for example. He was sponsoring TED Talks, So this is something that I think in general is something that corporations and, even these oligarchs and people from the ruling class have generally learned. It's smart to sort of spin this PR machine and put it out there that you're a good person. You're actually trying to help society. You're not just in it to buy more yachts and more mansions and more private islands. You're actually in it to help people. And that's, I mean, I think that's something that they've long hoped that people would buy into. I mean, even Google used to have the motto, "Don't be evil." I don't 15 years ago now, and they stopped saying that.
I know it was actually like more around 10 years ago they dropped it. But I mean, seriously, they said, we're not going to be evil. We're not a military industrial complex corporation. I want to stop because you brought up Epstein, and there's so many great points you just did. You said not only TED Talks, sponsoring TED Talks, he had his fingers in every charity, in every university. Bill Gates was running around with him at least 4 years after he'd already been convicted of, having sex with an underage or a child prostitute. They don't exist. And, now the media is getting around to the fact that he didn't have to register in New Mexico and other places. And I reported on that 5.5, 6 months ago when it came out in the initial DOJ investigation that the person he actually pled to was a 16-year-old and not a 14-year-old. Talk about catch-up. So yes, they mask this all the time. Not only Harvard University, not only tech companies like Microsoft, but Peter Thiel seems to have his hand in some of those investments as well. And I mean, when you're as big as Epstein and people are pandering to you for money, that seems to be par for the course. So they do kind of shroud their unvirtuistic characteristics in the name of charitable events and foundations. I mean, look at the Clinton Foundation, another thing that Epstein's lawyers alleged he was part of the founding of. We can't just, or was it the Clinton Initiative? It was either the foundation or the initiative. I don't want to misspeak here. But you are correct. And now, I am kind of surprised they didn't sign a pledge like this earlier. But I think a lot of that, Robbie, has to do with the fact that now, you notice, they're spinning things. Woke culture, for instance. Now, I've seen negative articles out there about Google employees not wanting to work on the drone programs. Well, I take that as an insult that you're trying to smear people that don't want to take part in the AI military drone programs you have with the Pentagon. And I mean, there's a new article out today. I'm going to Google this for the people. We do it live here. Didn't show this one to Robbie. But James Mattis had Eric Schmidt in the room while they're smart bombing with the drone. James Mattis, drone, Eric Schmidt. So you can't tell me Schmidt doesn't still have power either. Here it is. Google, and guess who else is in the headline? Google boss Eric Schmidt watched a drone annihilate a target live. And Defense Chief Jim Mattis was on the verge of swearing in Jeff Bezos without a security clearance. Pentagon's tech ties revealed as official claims she was betrayed for speaking out. Fuck yeah, she was betrayed for speaking out. This is how this whole system works. And I don't know, I just want to get your take on now how everything, it seems like the alternative media is a joke, Robbie. Now the alternative media wants us to label a group of American citizens, Antifa, as terrorists. They want to go along with everything Peter Thiel, a Bilderberg steering committee member, says, which is insane to me. And they want to blame every single thing on China as if we don't work hand in hand with them, with people like Eric Schmidt, who are in the Pentagon watching drone strikes with James Mattis. Take it away, sir.
Yeah, just going based on the last thing you said, it's very interesting to me. Our good friend Alex Jones is one of those people who's really taken that sort of limited hangout China and Google story and really ran with it. When in reality, Google is, doing a lot of damage here to our country specifically. So if you're really one of those Make America Great Again people, or even a full-on nationalist, you would think that you would be less focused on China and more focused on what a corporation is doing here in this country, and absolutely obliterating our privacy and going by completely unregulated for so long where there's pretty much no way to stopping them at this point. So, of course you see even alternative media people now who normally would be skeptical of anything remotely color revolution, like they always had been in the past, promoting the Hong Kong protest as legitimate. And I find that very interesting because there's a lot of clear crossover with not just U.S. State Department people, but people who are working with Trump administration officials. And actually in a really weird way, Jason, there's some really direct continuity between the way the Trump administration is dealing with these Hong Kong protests in the same way that the Obama administration was dealing with the Ukraine protests. So if you want to talk about how bad Obama was and how great Trump is, and he's not a war maker, he's a peacemaker. Well, why is there seem to be direct continuity here between the way the State Department is operating with Hong Kong than the way they're operating in Ukraine? I mean, it seems like literally the exact same program, just transitioning over to China. So, and I kind of went off on a tangent there.
No,
but
I'll be honest, Robbie. I've been wanting to have somebody
ahead.
on to talk about that. I just have to claim utter ignorance. Other than a couple of memes and maybe some short headlines,
Yeah.
I've not weighed in on that one because I'm not sure if we're seeing something that is organic or, like you said, manipulated by intelligence for certain interests. I mean, this is something that sprouted up rather quickly. Hong Kong is a contested area in the sense of who really should run this thing. You know, all that came up when, what was that treaty? I forget what year it was, but, you know, it had been under British rule the entire time, and then they had to give it up. Sure they did. So,
well,
yeah.
I'll just tell your listeners to check out. There's one particularly good article showing the State Department connections to this from Dan Cohen from the Gray Zone Project.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty comprehensive article that goes through a lot of it. But just going back to the whole idea of this corporate virtue signaling, I mean, I think one of the earliest versions of it that I remember seeing was when, like, oil companies, for example, started using environmentalist language or framing in their commercials. I mean, you don't even see a BP commercial, British Petroleum commercial anymore, with any, you know, that's lacking some kind of greenwashing, you know, corporate version of environmentalism. Like, they act like, you know, all they do is help the environment. When you see their commercials, it's like, wait, aren't they a fossil fuel company? So it is really interesting how long corporations have learned what things to sort of virtue signal on. And I think they've been doing environmentalism, you know, for a long time to basically take the focus away from the fact that there's, you know, some of the people fucking up the environment the most. I mean,
well, you know what, Robbie, I think you're right there. That's part of the distraction, but it also gives them control over land. And it also, I mean, the proposal is another tax mechanism for the general populace. So that would impose even more control over the populace. So, yeah, I think you're right. You know, they use it just like these foundations. Oh, we're helping fight disease. And yet, here we are 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, and how much progress have a lot of these, you know, foundations gotten in the cancer field? I mean, give me a break. And that's one of the things. I think they're good at building a facade. It's all PR. You know, that's why this latest story, the 181 tech companies, Jamie Dimon, Google, Amazon, all getting together, signing up for this thing, is more of that quote-unquote virtue signaling. I want to shift focuses just a little to this tweet that you have here. That's basically, you know, a cartoon where now when you type in false flag into Google, this is one of the first things that comes up as an example. And I'm not weighing in on the MAGA bomber here. I did some videos about it as it happened over at We Are Change, pointed out to some of the anomalies there. But, you know, crazy is crazy, and crazy happens. And I've talked about that as well. What's really upsetting to me is that they're making it into a literal joke of a parody. Because, number one, we don't know that this is a false flag incident, but they're making it into, oh, look, these crazy alt-righters are the ones saying false flag. Why don't we see a picture of something that's confirmed, like the Gulf of Tonkin or the USS Liberty,
Exactly.
Something of that nature? I mean, that should be of historic significance since these things do happen. And, Robbie, with the leak of that FBI document where it said that, you know, you're not allowed to talk about a new world order, you're not allowed to talk about Zionism, you're not allowed to talk about false flags in that narrative, or you could be a domestic terrorist. That's that Phoenix FBI memo. You know, those were, they threw Q in there, and that really upset me, number one, because if you believe in a fantasy, you still shouldn't be labeled as a terrorist. But there you have three legitimate issues. I mean, I'm one of the guys behind Loose Change and Fabled Enemies. They deal with false flag terror. Invisible Empire touches on that as well. And it also talks about what? A new world order. Since when is a guy like myself, who is asking questions, putting out quotes and documentation, who preaches love, understanding, and coming together, become a terrorist?
Well, to quote, what's his name from the Avengers? Doctor Strange from Avengers Infinity War, we're in the end game now. And I don't mean that in the Alex Jones sense of the word. I just mean that I think what we're witnessing, Jason, right now, what you're describing, it really is, we're in sort of the final stages of how the ruling classes in this country are going to erode free speech without literally taking away the First Amendment. This is the method that they've chosen to do it. I mean, we've been, sort of in fear for years that people who believe these kinds of things would be eventually targeted as terrorists or whatever. But we see it just sort of coming at us from all fronts now. I mean, just the idea alone that the YouTube algorithm, for example, appears to deliberately boost junk conspiracy videos. And by junk conspiracy videos, I mean it boosts things like Flat Earth. It will boost things like QAnon videos as well. I mean, some of the QAnon accounts on YouTube have more views, higher view counts than almost any other conspiracy videos you can find. So my overall theory here, Jason, is I think that what we're seeing on the surface is a soft censorship, shadow banning, deranking, demonetization, of all different types of controversial content. But what's happening under the surface also is I believe they are also purposely boosting junk content and things that would outrage society. So, for example, like hate speech that most people would consider very offensive. It's been shown that the YouTube algorithm has actually boosted that kind of content deliberately in the recommended views. We've already seen examples, crazy, disturbing, almost unbelievable examples of how the YouTube algorithm actually boosts child pornography. When I say child pornography, I don't mean actual nude videos. You've done videos on this in the past, Jason, that there's a whole network, a rabbit hole of YouTube algorithm recommends of quasi child porn on YouTube. We're not even talking about, live leak. This is YouTube.
And let's talk about what they are, because I
let
want people
me
to
just finish
understand.
the point I was trying to make, because just so people understand, I think that this content has been deliberately boosted on one end of this, so that on the other end of it, people will be outraged enough where the censorship across the board will seem acceptable, and people will not push against it. That's my general theory of what's happening with all that.
I suspect that that's part of it. Even the person that kind of outed that weird semi CP soft thing, he bought a lot of those views initially to get the media coverage that he did to get that shut down. If you look at his Social Blade, a lot of those views were gone in the days after. There was actually negative ones. So that alone makes it suspect. It was a YouTuber named Matt What It Is. But what you're talking about is monetized videos that were basically clips, usually of other people's kids or other videos that were out there on the web that had kids in skimpy outfits, or maybe there were a couple frames that showed something that they shouldn't have, that weren't caught up by the censors. And you would only have to search one thing, make a couple of clicks into those videos, and then all of a sudden, all the suggested videos with millions of clicks that no normal person would have been able to find were there. And in essence, what I think that was just another backdoor way for them to profit off of pedophiles. Let's be honest. They know that market exists, and they know they have a rabid base. And I can't believe that with the amount of views that they had and the inner circle networks, in other words, the analytics that you and I can see on our YouTube channel, who's clicking on this, what country, that they didn't know that this was a very minute network that were clicking on these videos all the time. I mean, they should have worked with law enforcement there, but what did they decide to do? They decided to turn a profit, Robbie. And that's why it's even more fucking laughable, this lead story that now they're pledging to help the world. Pledging to help the world, Robbie. I can't even get over it. It's so insane. And to speak to, the Google workers that did quit over that AI project with the Pentagon, do you think when something like that happens and Google announces, well, we're going to drop the project, do you think they actually drop the project, or do you think that they just, basically start using compartmentalization, rename the program, and then, use subcontractors to develop what they need to and then bring it in-house? I mean, I'd imagine that's what they're doing, since so much of this intelligence and tech work has been outsourced to privatized companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think what Google primarily makes the most of their profits, the overwhelming majority, off a very mundane, boring thing, which is advertising revenue. But I think what they're driving towards and what's ultimately going to make them way more powerful than they are even right now is their development of AI. And I mean, of course, even if they're not sending their guys to the Pentagon anymore, it's all their technology, it's all their code. You have to think Google has more information on humankind and people living right now and dead, that more than even like the NSA or any intelligence agency. I mean, they have so much data on people, that they're ahead in the race as far as like developing like a fully fleshed out AI, compared to a lot of other companies. That's some of the value in having that information. I mean, they're already probably running, they probably have server farms somewhere where we don't even know where the hell they are, running tons of just deep learning on all the data they already have to be doing what I'm describing. Deep fakes is just the beginning. It's not just visual, content that can be faked. They're already doing deep fakes on writings on the internet. They're taking all the text that they have available and generating AI auto-generated emails and stories just in internal experiments to see how far they can go with this stuff. I mean, it's a lot more creepier than I think people even have any grasp on.
Let me stop you right now. They're actually attempting things like movie scripts, which are coming out super laughable. Like I saw one on Batman. Don't get me wrong. Like the Batman is there in his cave. Like it's like a cheesy fourth grader was trying to rip off and plagiarize something they might have seen or read.
Well, that was just one guy, wasn't it? Wasn't that just like one coder on the internet who did that experiment?
Oh yeah. Dude,
well, apparently Elon Musk's side company, one of his side companies, has already developed what I'm talking about, and they released an example of what they claim to be auto-generated text, and it seems exact. I mean, it's indistinguishable from something somebody would write. Like it was creepy, realistic.
Yeah, no. When you get to bot work or 144 characters or 250 characters, that's already been done. I've actually watched the conversations with bot to bot, AI conversations. Yeah. And if they're short form, they're already pretty convincing. This is what we're seeing on a commercial level. Lord knows what they've already done in private. Guys, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, those special programs have existed for a very long time. Elon Musk, for instance, announcing about a week and a half ago to almost no fanfare that they have already put Neuralink in monkeys and interfaced it with computers. Yes, a monkey has now controlled a computer with its brain publicly outside of the science of our government, which has been doing that kind of stuff with electrodes for a long time. But remember, Neuralink is 4 small tethered holes into your skull and brain with a Bluetooth device attached behind your ear that you will interface with a computer. This is what they're selling on consumer levels, Robbie. And when they can literally access your brain from an implanted chip you can't take out, and maybe put some subliminal messages in there or some suggestions or a certain pulse that might make you docile, and people are clamoring for it because they can interact with their fucking phone, we live in a dystopic society that really hasn't been illustrated to its fullest potential.
Well, I'd say the closest, maybe, famous writer that's gotten the closest to this, it's not, what's his name? The guy who wrote Brave New World. I can't recall his name
Huxley.
Right now.
It's not Huxley.
It's not Huxley. It's not George Orwell. I would say it's Philip K. Dick.
Yeah.
I mean, he seems to have gone close. A lot of his people like laughed at his stuff. It was, really pulpy and sort of, really over the top. But I mean, it's the more time passes, the more realistic some of his concepts honestly seem.
You know what bothers me about K. Dick, though? And don't get me wrong, I think some of his stuff is absolutely brilliant. I wish Amazon had gone a little grittier with their series. I watched a lot of those, and they were pretty good. Steve Buscemi, they had a lot of great characters, actors. I think they made, I don't think they took a distinct color or direction in those. You know what I mean? Where you see that in other kind of anthology series. But a lot of people don't understand. Philip K. Dick is really the person that popularized the idea we live in a simulation, or even the Matrix theory, many, many years ago. And you can watch a clip of him talking about that and kind of equating it to, deja vu. and having that feeling that you've done something before, or basically that's the simulation, and that we're not really living in a reality. So he's definitely got some interesting stuff. But talk about that dystopia, because he's also Blade Runner, brother.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Total Recall. I believe the movie is based on multiple different short stories of his. It's pretty different from the original short story, but one of the interesting aspects of the short story that's really dystopian is that in the future, the police can actually surveil your brain because everyone has brain implants. So in the most of the short story takes place of a guy who's basically negotiating his surrender with the police through his own brain, by talking to them through like a two-way surveillance device. So, I mean, that might sound crazy, but we really aren't that far off from that. I mean, as soon as Neuralink becomes a reality, it's not just going to be them subliminally placing ads, directly into our neural pathways. They're going to shape our reality tunnel directly instead of indirectly. So right now, all this internet censorship, you could argue that, it's not just to necessarily hide things, although that's a side goal. It's ultimately to shape our reality tunnel in a specific, focused, narrow direction to believe and buy into the things they want us to believe, and I'm using the term they. Yes, I'll say it again. I mean, there is definitely an agenda to keep people complacent, to keep people acquiescent, to not protest, to not fight, to not get into the streets, and to not push for more rights and even things like free healthcare. I mean, there are all these apparatuses in place that don't want us to think in that direction. And even just if we're talking about companies that act like they're trying to save the world. I mean, pharmaceutical companies are an interesting example of they're supposed to be curing diseases. They're supposed to be helping people, but they've been caught so many times. I mean, Pfizer actually poisoned people in Africa with a trial drug that was basically toxic, and they didn't disclose to the people they were giving it to what it was or that it was untested. And the movie The Constant Gardener, one of the best political thrillers that's come out in the last 10 years or so, is based on that incident, where Pfizer actually killed people, claiming they're doing humanitarian work in Africa. So it's this kind of stuff happens all the time, and they constantly use this virtue signaling that I was describing earlier as a shield. I mean, we even do it when we do wars. I mean, Afghanistan's a good example of making it seem like it's all about saving the Afghan women, from this totalitarian rule, and things like that. Or with Russia, it was all about the gay propaganda law or Pussy Riot. They know how to make people buy into these things by making it seem like we care, essentially. But we know that they don't really care, especially when it comes to a corporation.
Well, you know what? I want to talk to you a little bit about the post-truth world. You were talking about them controlling the agenda, trying to keep people docile, not in the streets, not asking for real health care. I mean, we could go off on that tangent. I've got to watch, when I'm trying to fall asleep at night and I'm watching some Action Bronson watches Ancient Aliens, one of the best shows on television if you've never seen it, folks. And I've got to watch ads for Truvada, this stylized PrEP drug for HIV. I'm on the pill. It starts with a dude saying, I'm on the pill. And I think that there's one woman in it and one transgender woman in it. And they have to clarify that it's not birth control. And I'm like, no kidding, it's not birth control. What is this? And now, to protect yourself from HIV, if you're in some kind of high risk point, you want to take a drug that could shut down your kidneys and do all sorts of other type of bullshit to you. And get tested every 3 months for HIV, a drug that is tested for very differently in very different countries. It varies from the United States to Canada to Sweden to parts of Africa. Whether you knew that or not, I want to let you know that's the truth about that. And that's what they're selling, these trendy, stylized, you have some money, we don't really care about your core health. I mean, these are drugs they're marketing to people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. You know what I'm saying, Robbie? It's not like we're talking about health care, in my opinion. It's slave care. It's brainwash care. But we've gone 30 minutes. I only got you for 10 or 15 more or so. I want to talk about that post-truth world and Epstein. We have not talked to Epstein probably, I don't know, you were on maybe a month ago, maybe 3-4 weeks ago, and obviously a lot's happened. Give me the Media Roots Robbie Martin take on Epstein and the post-truth world.
Oh, I don't have just one take is the problem. I mean, I'll give you one thing that I thought was interesting is the way that the media was sort of dueling over the Clinton body count and Trump body count, hashtag. It became a very partisan issue, which is, I guess, to be expected with something like this. But I also found something else interesting is that it almost seemed like the media, when I say the media, I mean the mainstream media, seemed to be greasing the skids for people to believe he was murdered while at the same time releasing stories shaming people for being conspiracy theorists about his death. And that was something that I haven't really seen an example that I can't remember another example of that happening where the mainstream media was sort of doing both at the same time. And I described it on the podcast as sort of when the normies all go truther. Like everybody was just saying, I didn't see really anybody except for maybe a handful of people saying that he committed suicide. It seemed like everybody was skeptical of the official narrative. So I think that might be a good sign that people are that skeptical and understand a lot of the implications behind what happened. But I don't know. I mean, we are living in such a weird era that I even believe that Trump is participating in the QAnon narrative. So it's really interesting that you said there's an FBI memo where they're classifying certain people who believe in conspiracy theories as terrorists, including people who believe in Q. That makes me think the whole thing could just be some kind of honeypot type of operation where it's just let's suck in all these people, even maybe make some of them do violent things, so we can classify this group of people a terrorist group, and then on the other side classify Antifa as a terrorist group. Because like you said on your last broadcast,
people in that net, bro. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
Listen, Antifa, when somebody's wearing a black mask and they assault another person with a baton or a stick or a milkshake, they are breaking the law. They need to be arrested and prosecuted as to what they did. Assault. All right? If they try to hit you with a hammer, that could be manslaughter or attempted murder. That's enough. We need to make examples of these people? Absolutely. We do not need to net in a large group that, in my opinion, has been co-opted from the beginning to kind of corral people into non-issues, right? Take them away from talking about the military-industrial complex and the banksters and the real problems. Get them into identity politics issues and have them fighting with people that are making the same wage as they are, But then we can classify them all as terrorists too. I mean, I feel
really
that's the real deal.
I mean, I think it's really interesting too. Like I'm super far left, but I've never really been a fan of the way Antifa behaves or how it's been represented in the media, and I'm especially suspicious, that who promotes Antifa. It seems to be a lot of these like generic, sort of war pushing neoliberal political figures, like on Twitter and stuff. And I'm not saying that there aren't good people who believe in the cause of anti-fascism, but it is really interesting, that really does sort of it is amping up the divide and conquer mentality. And I think that more often than not, the right side of the spectrum benefits from making it appear that everybody on the left is essentially a person in a black mask, carrying a baton. It's been really, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it's gotten much more gains for the right than it has for the left. So like, even just on a strategic tactical level, I fundamentally disagree with that. It's like, look at what, every time they're in the press, it's not like the Proud Boys are the ones who get, the viral videos of them circulating. It's these videos of these people who are in black masks and Antifa who are breaking windows and stuff. And people, get really outraged at that, obviously, when that spreads around, or beating someone over the head or things like that. And just for the record, I'm not for classifying any group a terrorist organization in this post 9/11 climate. I mean, I would even argue strip away every group that's currently designated as a terrorist, because it's become a completely meaningless, arbitrary label that basically strips away your fundamental rights. And it's a way to essentially get around international law. So, no, I don't think the Proud Boys should be designated a terrorist group. I don't think Antifa should be designated a terrorist group. And if you're on the right and hate Antifa, I mean, just think for a second how ludicrous and stupid it would be to say that Antifa should be labeled a terrorist group. It's so counterproductive, and it is the most obvious slippery slope ever. So,
and I would say this, Robbie, question who the fuck is telling you to do that and preaching that every day, all day, that these people are terrorists. I mean, that is extremely dangerous. I don't think people understand how dangerous that really is when you take swaths of American citizens that are organizing, whether you like it or not, and labeling them terrorists. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that it is a joke, because let's be honest, they already named, a decade plus ago, every male 16 years or older overseas that was of fighting age an enemy combatant in any nation that we occupy, no matter, whether or not that occupation is valid or not. So kind of moving back to Epstein, where do you see the circus going? I hate even alluding to anything that's in the alternative media, but everybody's calling it clown world. But I've been calling it cartoon world for well over a decade, because all this stuff isn't new. It's all been out there. But I feel like it's totally been amplified and manipulated. And now I think the major point with whatever happened to Epstein, dead, swapped out, suicided, etc., 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 it's almost impossible to tell what the truth is, because we are in the post-truth world. There's no reason that this guy shouldn't have been under 24-hour surveillance with a guard parked at his door with cameras around the entire area, with him wearing a body camera on that was being literally transmitted to somebody else, seeing he is the most high-profile prisoner we have ever had that's been a United States citizen. And they essentially did that to El Chapo, what really comes down to a mid-level cartel dealer that was there for a decade or so that they used, and another guy will take his place tomorrow, and has. And another guy has taken his place tomorrow, and has. And is still working with our intelligence agencies to deal the drugs here. So, I'll ask you again, your take on where all this Epstein clownery goes in the post-truth world.
Wow, I mean, I don't know. I think my initial reaction was, I think people should mostly be asking how they, why did they take him off suicide watch? So I think that's one of the most strong points that to argue from. But I guess for me personally, the body double stuff, it bothered me that so many people were coming out with that so heavy, right in the wake of his death, because to me, it's like it just takes a lot more coordination, and it would take a lot more planning.
But here, let me hear me out here. Listen, I said the same thing. Like, I'm like, hey, we have the pictures of Epstein coming out, right? And people were like, his ear, blah blah blah. And I'm not saying those pictures are faked or staged, but then a week and a half, 2 weeks later, when we have Ghislaine Maxwell, who's supposed to be on the East Coast, taking photoshopped pictures that the Post, the same place that published the Epstein death photos, is saying she's in New York and she's reading a CIA book. What isn't under manipulation? They put a fucking ad in there for Good Boys, a movie that was out. Talk about post-truth manipulation. I don't know if you were aware of that, Rob.
Oh no, that is so crazy and so weird. And I'm sure you've already talked about in one of your broadcasts the book she was reading.
Yeah.
And what kind of message that was trying to send.
Yeah, who's she sending the message to? Is she trying to play up in the media that I want to play the intelligence angle, right? Or is it a stark warning that I will talk, that's why I'm not arrested? Again, I got the New York Post to put a picture of me where maybe I'm not. In-N-Out Burgers aren't all in Hollywood, California, although they have matched that up. But at the same time, you look at where her leg is and there's obvious photoshopping. And we know that ad didn't exist there. So what is reality, man? That's my
Dude.
point. It pushes it further to the point where listen. I hated the body swap out thing. I'm like, boy, that would take a lot of coordination. But then you find out after those documents get unsealed, one of the last people, if not the last person that he sees, is a young, pretty woman whose age hasn't been determined, and he's locked in a room with her for 2 hours. Like, how does that even happen?
Oh, I mean, you raise a lot of good points. The photoshopped In-N-Out Burger thing is just so wild. I don't even really know what I can add to that. But I have noticed that it does seem like there's a skip in Trump's step after Epstein died. It seems like Trump is like even more like elated and confident than usual. And I don't know if there's any connection to Epstein's death in that, but I have noticed Trump just getting a little more batty and sort of over the top acting since his death. I don't know if you saw this recent clip where he pointed to the sky and said that he's the chosen one.
No, but I did see the headline where he said people in Israel think that I'm the second coming of God. I do need to, like I said, man, with the Epstein stuff, and I just did the Tinfoil Hat cast, and I just did the Ripple Effect cast, and I just did John B. Wells. I'm trying to get out to a broader audience. You know that, Robbie. I mean, we've known each other now well over a decade. You know, it's never been about left or right to me, and it's always been about trying to share this information with others. That's why I love having you on. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but there's a lot that we can agree on. With that being said, Robbie, why don't you tell people where they can find your stuff and where they can subscribe to you, how they can help you out?
Well, you can go over to my YouTube channel, A Very Heavy Agenda, subscribe. Obviously, hit the notification bell, like everyone says these days, because they unsubscribe you for some reason, inexplicably now. And I do live streams pretty regularly now. Definitely not as regular as Jason. More like once a week right now, but I'm trying to do them more often. You could support me doing those at patreon.com/Robbie Martin. And our podcast, the podcast Abby and I do together, Media Roots Radio. We still do that every week. We just put out a 2.5-hour episode about Epstein. So check that out. And my documentary film about the neocons and Cold War 2.0, A Very Heavy Agenda, is still available on DVD and streaming. You can go check that out at veryheavyagenda.com.
Thank you so much, Robbie. And at the very least, we got to get together for the upcoming September debates. Maybe we'll have you on before then, but definitely then. Robbie Martin, MediaRoots.org, and make sure you go check out A Very Heavy Agenda. Thank you very much, sir. So,
Thanks,
guys,
Jason.
thank you, man. Guys, this is how I'm doing it. I do it through GoFundMe. And if you want to support me, great. Otherwise, you can just thumbs this up, share it, subscribe if you're new to the Burmis Brigade. We're 32K plus strong at this point, which is just fantastic. We're on the road to 50K. And guys, at 50K, what do you think about this? I was talking to my old boss and friend who I have coffee with in the morning. And what do you think about flipping pizzas to 50K for like a 4-5 hour stint? So I'd go into the pizza shop. I'd be flipping pies when we were at like 49 and change. And we do kind of like, instead of like a money bomb type event where I'm asking for donations, I would ask viewers in a live stream chat as I made pizza in a busy college town to share my channel with others and get the subs up. I think it's kind of an inventive idea. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. And once again, guys, I'm doing this with your help 3, 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 times a day. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you on the flip side.